We've got a good crowd today.
Yeah, really good.
Brilliant.
We're going to get stuck straight in because Pam's got a bit of an emergency. So she's going to tell us about the Right to Grow bill, and then we can catch up with everybody after that. Sorry that it's a bit like straight in there, but Pam, over to you.
That's terribly kind. Thank you so much. And I don't normally rush into these things, but I do have a cat that's having a fit behind me. So I just wanted to share the opportunity. First of all, thank you so much for what you're doing. It's totally and utterly fantastic. And I think you'll see if I just do a very brief overview of the Right to Grow and where we're up to with the amendments, you can see the importance of the work that you're doing and why we desperately need to be able to understand how to make this as easy as possible for people and to cut through what is an area of an awful lot of activity, but sometimes quite difficult to know what's the best route in. So basically, Incredible Edible, working with Rights Community Action and Town and Country Planning Association, have produced a piece of legislation called the Community Right to Grow on Public Spaces like that, bill, which has been drawn up by barristers. So it's ready to be inserted in any piece of legislation. We are taking, and basically what that does is it says it's not about ownership, it's about changing the dynamic of the dialogue between citizen and state when it comes to land, public realm. And it says citizens have the right to grow food and improve their local environment on publicly owned land, subject to certain very simple conditions, and that anchor institutions, particularly local government, health authorities, but public space stewards, if you like to put it that way, must, and the word is must, take into account those needs of citizens when it comes to growing and improving their environment. And predominantly it's about cultivation, but we have included the wider environmental enhancement brief because it goes hand in hand, and also it gives us a broader base on which to argue the position. So this is based on not everybody has to do it, but when we look at those communities who have successfully got a good working record with their anchor institutions and they achieve great things, people get together, we understand all the benefits of community growing and the like. When they don't have supported institutions, it's a pain in the neck. And, you know, they either have to be creative or they just give up, because this is about trying to make sure that not just those that are already tuned into this can do it, but the people in the most challenged circumstances in the years to come can find it easy to grow food and nurture their communities in land close to home. That's the point of it. So celebrating the good, but also calling out the bad, you know, and just creating that level playing field around what will be an ever increasing need, as I'm sure everybody on this call recognises. You wouldn't believe this. This is just the way we change the world, I suppose. It's not a straight line. So we've got that. So I have a chat with some people that I know, and to cut a long story short, we've got an amendment down in the House of Lords because the Levelling Up Bill, which is our opportunity to do something, is in the Lords. And that is the way in because we've got more sympathy there. So Rosie Boycott has moved the amendment, but so independent, crossbencher, backed by Barbara Young, Labour peer, and Baroness Scott, Liberal peer. So it's cross all parties. This is not about party politics. This is about humanity. So so that's been tabled, and it's tabled under the Community Cultivation Scheme amendment. But basically, that's our way into a debate on the right to grow. What that means, now we've got that tabled, which was no mean feat, is that it has to be debated in the Lords. So the possibility of raising the profile about right to grow on public land is there. They cannot not debate it. If when it goes to report stage, they vote on it and we get enough peers backing it, it has to go on the face of the bill and it has to go back to the Commons, and Michael Gove has to stand up and say why he won't do it. Now, we're a long way between those two things, but who would have thought we'd have got the amendment down, and we have got the amendment down. So where we're about now is looking for those people who can influence peers and send the brief there and talk to them about why this matters for so many reasons. I don't need to go into anything with this group of people. But if we get enough peers backing this, it's a shoo-in. So we shall see. At the very least, the game is, because it's a long game, the game is that we get it into party manifestos. If Gove et al. Says, not for us, there's too many things going on with housing and planning and God knows what, we have got the debate on the floor, both of the Commons and the Lords, and then we start to go for getting it in party manifestos. And sooner or later, this is a no-brainer. Now, there's lots of slips, tricks, cup and lip, in the sense that we've got a piece of legislation that we want to happen. We know it needs to have a funding facilitation so that it can encourage local authorities and others to put a small resource behind making a mapping exercise real. And that needs to be, you know, we need to work out the details of that. It's not a complete fait accompli. We know that we need to celebrate the good and not frighten those that are already doing great things. So there's lots of, you know, conversations to be had, but what we do want is your support to, first of all, feed into how it can be easier for local authorities, health authorities, for any public land steward to actually map in partnership with their communities the land that is available and suitable for growing in a meanwhile sense, as well, not just in perpetuity, but, you know, to fit the needs. And lastly, and I am going to have to fly at this point because the cat's going completely bonkers, but lastly, if your work on mapping can tie in with our need to raise the profile with peers, then I'd love one-to-one conversations about who you know. And we're producing briefs, we're producing case studies, we're producing killer facts, we're doing all that stuff that peers can look at and engage in conversation on. And that can happen at a number of levels, as I say, both in terms of health and well-being, both in terms of environmental improvements, both in terms of food justice, there's a social justice agenda, you know. It's basically what I would call a piece of key, a sort of turnkey legislation, because it looks dead simple, but actually it opens the possibilities to a lot more things going on. And it's the only foot in the door we've got with this levelling up bill. So, and it's, I guess the last thing I would say is, having read the levelling up bill, or the amendment, there's 500 amendments going down in the Lords. So there's a lot of amendments that we talked about, but most are around planning and housing and the like. This is one of the very few, in fact, it's the only one that I can see, that actually impacts directly on people. Not institutional change, but people. And it can be done tomorrow. So that's where I'm at with this. Thank you for giving me that opportunity. And I'm sorry to be so dramatic. I'm not normally that dramatic. I'm normally noisy, but not dramatic.
Oh, Pam, thank you so much. You've got to go. Go.
I have. Thank you so much,
Thank you,
everybody. God
Pam.
bless. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you soon.
Right, that was a bit of a whirlwind. It would be great to get anyone's response to that. So feel free to come up with anything. I see it as there's two things that need to happen. One is for us to offer mapping to local authorities, because Pam is saying that the resistance here is that they can't find the funding for the mapping. So we've had that chat before, but it's again looking at how as a group we can look for funding to enable the mapping to take place. And then the other piece of the jigsaw is the lease agreements, the arrangements over how that land is shared with communities, which she touched on. Do butt in and say whatever is in your mind.
Mary was just wondering what the time frame is. Just put in the chat. Do we know what the time frame is for the?
I know that February is the kind of getting as many peers interested as possible. So it's a very short time that we have to stir up interest.
Just to the end of this month.
She seemed to say that to me on a recent call. Let me
Right.
just check my notes again. That seems too short.
It might just some of these, well, it might not be too short. That might be absolutely right. It just maybe just as a follow-up to this call, it might be helpful just to send around a few sort of key dates or something, because that will certainly be, that's something we'll need to know when talking to other people, I think.
So what I wrote down, it's on the floor of the Lords until the end of February. What does that actually mean?
Recording in progress.
Whoops. Yeah, that's what she has said to me. So I could distribute to everybody the key information about what the amendment is. This main word is that local authorities must release land. That's the change. So it's within the Levelling Up Bill, and it's called Community Cultivation Scheme. So it's not called Right to Grow, it's called Community Cultivation Scheme. Sophie, go ahead.
Lord Best might be a decent option. So over the summer, there was the report on creating healthy cities, which was promoted or spearheaded by, he was very much involved. He, was supporting it. And one of the key recommendations was to support healthy lifestyles, increase support for community-run initiatives, including social, cultural, etc., local schemes that produce healthy food, e.g. with allotments and vegetable gardens. So it fits perfectly into the recommendations of that report.
Yeah, okay. Anyone have an in there, or do we send a general? I'm seeing what you're saying, Mary, and Connor. Okay, so I think
I know someone who knows him, but I don't have any kind of closer connection than that.
Okay, so the comms person for Pam is this woman called Prue Elliott, and I think the next thing is to find out who's been contacted so far, and as Connor's suggesting, and I can distribute that list to everybody, and then you add names or contacts that you might have. And I think Prue will also supply us with all the information we need to say why we want those particular people to step up. Is that helpful?
Mm.
Yeah.
Are you happy to contact Prue and
Yeah,
ask for those things?
I'll ask Prue for that.
Great.
One of the anyone else want to say anything, or can I say something? One of the questions that I've put to the group before is where can we find funding for some mapping work? This is I've just had a list actually from somebody that might be useful from Sustain on looking for possible funders, and also who's interested in, do we create a sort of bank of mappers who can be called on to support local authorities? What's the best way to do this? Because you're all much more experienced than me on that. I mean, I was thinking Con, Mark and Jules, you've all done this kind of work. So any thoughts on that? Mark will have to write something because he's in a room where he can't speak.
No, I've actually found another room.
Oh, well, that's good.
Just outside the labs. It's often used for meeting space, so there might be people walking past.
That's fine.
I guess my question, well, haven't we got something in place already with Land Explorer? And isn't that really the kind of the most stable tech that's out there and most commonly used? I don't know what you think about that, Jules.
I'm obviously a massive fan of Land Explorer because I helped make it. I work for Shared Assets, and I think one of the key things about Land Explorer is it's a cooperative. So it's a platform co-op, which is really important, both in terms of owning or collectively owning the software, but also the data that sits in it. You know, we're democratizing access to the data. And I think the right to grow, when we talk about mapping land, is precisely that. It's how we open up that data and get it in front of the communities that need it. So, you know, the ethos is definitely there. Land Explorer has recently become a product in its own right. It's part of Digital Commons. So certainly they're on that kind of trajectory. So perhaps before we even start to think about funding, we might start to think about what kind of features and functionality we collectively need and users might need to be able to identify and map land that might be available via a right to grow.
Yeah.
Because I think it's a relatively short step to get some of those onto Land Explorer. There's a very elegant feature right now, which is land registry data. And so you can actually find the title ID and the Inspire number on Land Explorer already. It's not quite there where it actually tells you who owns it. You still need to look that up on Land Registry, but it's only a very short step because the commercial and corporate data set from Land Registry is free. You know, so if it's owned by a corporation, a charity, a public sector, it would show. In terms of funding, I mean, there's possibly Nesta and a few others that might be really interested in this, particularly when it's a bit of joined up thinking in terms of things like 20-minute neighborhoods, community climate action planning, because the ability to access green spaces to grow is intimately linked with those kind of, you know, those kind of things. And I suspect local authorities would probably have an appetite for supporting this in terms of providing data. And then I think an awful lot of the work could be done potentially by citizen planners, you know, sort of, you know, community members, essentially. As a community, if we go to our political representatives and just simply ask the question, and there's enough of us, can we have access to your mapping data, please? You know, what's your estate look like? Can we load it onto a map? Then, you know, groups can perhaps do that piece of work, which reduces the burden of, you know, having a team to actually do the work in terms of funding. So really, it's accessing data. And perhaps getting communities, citizen scientists interested in uploading it, and then it's possibly a short step, you know. But yeah, it would certainly be helpful, I think, if everyone in this room was to, you know, write expressions of interest, letter of intent, because that would be a good evidence base for any funding application.
Brilliant, Jules. Thank you. I can see a couple of people got their hands up. Mary. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jamie. I've got a couple of thoughts on this relating to kind of funding and next steps. One, I mean, it's a very small bit of funding, but with Friends of the Earth, I am already in the process of commissioning Maddie to do a really short kind of synthesis piece of work of what's already out there, in terms of, because I feel there are quite a lot of different, you know, Jules has talked about Land Explorer, but, you know, there are lots of different projects happening in different places with mapping. And I think, you know, Maddie and I could look at the brief for that to make sure it at least kind of provides a bit of a sort of state of the nation of what already exists in terms of the mapping tools that could be of use for local authorities doing this kind of thing. Because unless somebody, I mean, I'm not an expert on this. That's partly why I'm asking about commissioning Maddie, but other people, you know, unless people know differently, I feel like that information probably isn't all gathered together in one. That information probably isn't all gathered together in one place. So it's really just, you know, what existing examples are there? Where's their good practice? What are local authorities kind of already doing? And I'm particularly interested in how how from the sort of less from the local authority point of view, but from the point of view of the 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 citizen who wants to get involved in greening, urban greening and growing in one way or the other, let's say I identify a patch of neglected land at the end of my street or whatever, that's my kind of user perspective. How can I figure out who owns it and then start growing on it? So these things are all related. I'm just coming at it from a slightly different angle. And so there is the question about the mapping to make this all visible, I think all ties together. So I think that's one thing that I can offer immediately, that I think we can do some of that synthesis work, and that will help us show where the gaps are, and that can feed into this project as well. I think something that would be really, really helpful would be to consider whether there's scope for a kind of demonstrator area or demonstrator project. So what if there was one local authority? Imagine if, when this legislation is passed, what would it look like? And can we bring to life what it would look like for one local authority, for example? So if the maps and whatever were all there. And I think it might be easier to attract funding as well for a kind of demonstrator project that would bring to life how this could work and what it would look like as a kind of first stage. So it might also be worth thinking about where there are local authorities. Pam talks about the ones who are already kind of, friendly and helpful, local authorities that are already on this journey that might be willing to act as a kind of demonstrator. Again, people on this call, or where work has already been done. So, I'm thinking about places like Lambeth and Lancaster, and what would that look like? I think that might be an interesting approach to take.
So on the call that I had with Pam last week, when she told me that this had happened, she's very keen for Lambeth to be a pilot. She's also looking at Hull, because they're doing a lot of work there with community growing. So she thought one in the north and one in the south would be great. We've got a lot of connections in Lambeth, but we've got a very reluctant local authority. I mean, not reluctant, just not joined up. So I suppose if we cracked that one, it would be quite an achievement. But as Marge knows, we've experienced a lot of issues over just getting them to connect with us. Like they don't come on these calls. They always pull out at the last minute. And I got 2 emails this morning saying, sorry, something's come up.
Oh no.
So, yeah, so it's very, it's frustrating, but we're not giving up. We've got loads of hands up. So I think Mark was next, and noted, Mary. Thank you very much for those.
Thanks, Janie. I'd just like to just kind of reflect on the work we did at Lancaster, identifying food hope spots, because in that we had a number of different user groups. So we had kind of community food groups, we had people who were interested in developing small-scale horticulture, had small kind of residence groups, and of course we had the local authority involved. And I think what's important to recognise is that all of those groups have got different priorities and different perceptions of what is needed. And I think that it's going to be very important in this proposal, and perhaps also in Maddie's work, if I could suggest a little amendment there, to think about the different the different agencies, the different parties involved, and what they actually want. Because certainly we found that the local authority had a very different perspective on food production to the community groups, and kind of making sure, just because we're putting stuff on a map doesn't mean that all those different stakeholders are in alignment in terms of not only what information they want to collect, but also how they interpret it. So I think there needs to be a kind of a bigger wrapper around that. Because the danger would be if we kind of go in saying, oh, we'll involve this group, this group, this group, that they won't talk. And just to your point, Janie, about, Lambeth being reluctant, I'm sure there are other local authorities who are similarly reluctant, even in the face of an engaged community. So kind of stepping back and really kind of formally thinking about and it's a tech platform, so the user groups involved is going to be very important.
Thank you, Mark. Really helpful. Dan.
I'm not sure I was the next, but
sorry.
So
sorry.
I'm happy to be in the queue.
Okay, so Joanna.
Yeah.
Yeah, Joanna.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Just a few things. In terms of Mary and Maddie's work, I don't know if this will be at all helpful, but we did do a literature review when we were doing the Lambeth plots, trying to understand what kind of mapping tools were out there already. We didn't know about Land Explorer back then, so that's probably the way to go. But we did do a bit of a matrix that identified, access to certain tools, paid plans, free plans, and also ease of use. And then also just going back to citizen-led mapping, we also did that, and that was really effective because it really covers a lot of ground. So we did a GIS component as like the desktop research that identified, vacant pieces of land, and then we did a second phase of actually going to see the land for ourselves, take photos, and that was also uploaded onto the map to just give another sort of refining of the mapping, to really validate that these spaces are underused and they underperforming and they're just an eyesore and whatever the case may be. So citizen-led mapping, we're definitely happy to go with that one from our side. And in terms of funding, Arup is open to funding. It's not like an endless pool of funding that will go on for the rest of our days, but we can find ways to tap into as Janie knows, and that's why we started working together. As we started, our company started investing in mapping, and now we're about three years in, and they're still funding these projects. So there's also a way in for that. And then just on Mark's point on the agency and parties involved, that's like a really big interest of mine, especially in the work that I do as a landscape architect, is that we create these roadmaps. We don't just do the mapping and then we just hand it over, or it just sits, in space, and then no one really knows how to engage with this information and all the different key stakeholders. So that's also something we could look at doing, as creating a bit of a roadmap for engagement and how that might go about. So every couple of years, for instance, there could be like a milestone where community groups and land and local authorities come together around the table and decide, based on their action plans, long-term future action plans, and the immediate needs, and then start to negotiate what happens to the land. Yeah. And those are just all my points. Thanks.
Thanks, Jana. Fantastic. Who's next? Com, Dan, or Jules? Well, Jules has disappeared, has he?
Can I be heard? Am I
yes. Yeah, you go, Com.
Yeah, okay, great. I wasn't sure whether I was on mute or not.
No, you're not. Go.
So it's Colm here from Digital Commons Co-op. I need to leave quite soon. I've got a clash which I can't get out of. But I can give you a bit of a summary where I think the Digital Commons sort of development on this. So firstly, I wanted to say that the Land Explorer is getting a lot of very, very active development at the moment. So there's quite regular releases, and there's another release, and the drive for that has come from the Resilient Green Spaces kind of social farms and gardens work kind of we did in Wales. So the kind of the learning from that work is a bit what's being developed at the moment. But there's a new project that's just started in Oxford, which will be a place for new kind of requirements to sort of be fed into Land Explorer, which is basically be a survey of the sort of data and mapping needs of common good land use projects and solidarity economy needs of groups in Oxfordshire. And that's a collaboration with CAG Oxford, Community Action Group Oxford. So especially through their networks, we're getting we're going to get the needs and then sort of feed them into mapping features in Land Explorer and possibly other tools. We've also just finished a little bit of work on assessing the kind of the mapping landscape out there as well, so better understand how we fit in to the kind of the ecology of mapping tools and other things out there. So it'll be great to sort of maybe feed that in with the other work that's being done and the new work that Maddie is leading. That'd be great to sort of pull all that together. I think that could be a very useful piece of work. So yeah, so my suggestion maybe is through the and also that the work with Oxford in the Oxfordshire project that is also has good connections with the Oxford City Council. So it comes out of co-op development work in Oxford, which the City Council has been part of. So there's a relationship with the City Council that's already established with this project, and CAG is funded by the Oxfordshire, the county councils in Oxfordshire. So this project will be able to, it is already well connected with the local authorities in Oxfordshire. So that might be a way of making some progress. Yeah, that's my summary.
Fantastic. That's really helpful. Definitely get back to you on the Oxford thing. That's brilliant.
Are you suggesting, Colm, that Oxfordshire might be a good pilot for the Right to Grow kind of piece?
Well, I guess I'm not sure what the pilot is really, so it's hard to, without a slightly better knowledge of what that might be. But certainly, if a place that sort of has a project that has good connections with growers and sort of land users in an area and connections with local authorities that is established and experience with mapping tools. So those three elements would be overlapping in this new Oxford project.
Yeah, great.
Fantastic. Thank you. Definitely worth thinking about. I was wondering about Oxford in terms of it's most of its land is dominated by the university, not local authority, and they're very, very hard to work with. That was my kind of reticence with Oxford, but they do have very good, the council definitely wants to make a difference, and they have amazing food plan. So we should be considering them. Jules and then Dan.
Thanks. So I think we're discussing a variety of different topics. So potentially a pilot, potentially a mapping application that we can all decide on and choose, where we might get funding from, and our community of users. So I'm just going to break those down a little bit. So in terms of pilot, fantastic. Yes, I think Suffolk County Council might also be interested, because Suffolk has the aspiration of being the greenest county, and are doing some really excellent activity, and we've got great contacts. So that's maybe an option to have a conversation as well. In terms of a mapping application, there are absolutely millions of mapping applications. They map all sorts of stuff. And I know this because obviously we did a very deep dive as Shared Assets in terms of what mapping applications are available. So I'm delighted Colm's mentioned that work as well, because you can draw on that, Maddie and Mary, to inform perhaps work that you're doing. It was a funded assessment of the market that's available for community growers, how to access land. And so I think the heritage of that work will really, really inform. And if you go to the community groups, they'll use all sorts of different mapping applications, from Google to OpenStreetMap to larger scale GIS systems. If you scratch under the surface a bit in terms of farming, there's Fera and Land 360, there's the Land app, there's OmniScience, there's Field Margin. There's a huge amount of mapping applications out there, but really it comes down to what's been, from my perspective, what's been born from our community of growers that want to access land, and that's really where Land Explorer has come from. And the key element to Land Explorer right now is that it has Ordnance Survey data. So that's like absolutely number one key criteria. Google doesn't have that. OpenStreetMap doesn't have that granularity, and particularly when you look at actually then when you get on a piece of land and you want to do a site map and where's the topology and where does the water flow, Land Explorer starts to have some of that, those kind of features. So pretty much every mapping application out there that uses Ordnance Survey data will be paid for. So the commercial consideration is really important when it comes to community groups, because it's very difficult to afford stuff, you know, and how we pay for things. A couple of other points. Just want to highlight that normally in terms of product development, what you often do is actually go and get your community of users first. So before the funding and before even a choice of an application, I would start to get 1,000 users that want to do a thing. You know, that's the traditional trajectory for product development for SaaS applications, is you go and form your user groups, you know, and get a pipeline of excited people who want to do a thing. So perhaps take a step back and we could think about networks that we have that want to do this in their area, as I say, and get them as a group to go to their councils. It's also not standalone activities. So again, I'm applying for some really significant funding for community climate action, and a large proportion of that will be mapping. Be mapping green spaces to grow. So I've had some really fruitful conversations with Maddie and hope to collaborate on that, because it's also, you know, where's our housing stock, what is suitable for renewable energy, you know, what pressures do we have on water, and that combines at a very local level. I'm a parish councillor, and that combines with our emergency plan, our biodiversity plan, and our neighbourhood development plan. So these sit alongside each other really quite well. And so we are having conversations about potentially integrating Land Explorer with the community software that we're using for this group called Hilo, with the aspiration of being able to map all of those things. So as someone who's concerned about the climate, might want to plant some stuff, we can utilize a map, but it's probably not standalone activity. So we can perhaps join in and help with some of the funding for an element in terms of mapping public sector land and other land like Church of England land. So I think that's probably about it. So Land Explorer was through the project funding, which was 100,000 to build it. Have done lots of assessments of community needs, commercial assessments of other software out there and this kind of thing. Hopefully that work will prove valuable again, rather than again. So thanks.
Can I just add something quickly on that point before we move on?
Mm-hmm.
I just want to, I'm really excited about the Land Explorer and how it's developed over the years, because when we started the work in Lambeth, we really struggled to find, our aspiration was to find a software that was user-friendly, that was that wouldn't deter people by sign-up subscriptions and pay walls and things like that. And then we had to fall back onto our internal GIS, which is specialists, which is very specialized and expensive to use. So we fell flat in that aspect, because we wanted something that was replicable and easy to access, and create a methodology that community groups could adopt easily without having specialists like ourselves on board. So yeah, I'm really glad we've segued into this place. Thanks, Jules.
Thanks, Jana. Thanks, Dan. Finally.
No problem at all. Thank you, Jenny. And yeah, just to kind of echo Jules what he was saying. I mean, I think the important thing is that, you know, the user groups, be they very diverse, of course, in terms of different stakeholders, that is an absolutely essential part, I think, going into any project which is community based or community focused. And I would echo also what he was saying about housing and resource use, because we're talking about space, which is always in competition for other uses. And of course, housing departments are quite fixed on using spaces for development. And we've got to also include, of course, the the meanwhile spaces as well in many city centres. And reflecting on Oxford, just briefly before I go on to my main point, I mean, I live in Oxford and I know many spaces which are in current development or have been not being used for 4, 5, 6, 7 years, and which could have actually offered the local community food growing space. Anyway, that aside, what I physically wanted to say is that I wanted perhaps to give a different insight into local authorities in London, because as some of you might know, I'm coming up to the end of quite, I would believe, an exciting project in London, which is about mapping principally vacant and underutilised spaces, which is funded currently by one of the major UK research councils, so it's a research project. But the main aim of it is to provide local authorities, in this case the London Borough of Islington, a user-friendly dashboard which will help them with assessing suitable sites for future food growing. And I suppose one of the key aspects when we started the project was not just establishing those user groups, and Islington, I think, out of many London boroughs has such a vibrant food growing community, the Octopus Community Network, for example, but also a local authority set up with food growing principally as their priority. And so at the start of the project, we were in meetings with the Greening the Public Realm and Housing, for that matter, and the councillors of the Local Environment and Regeneration Scrutiny Committee, which are all very, very excited about the potential for finding new spaces for food mapping. And so throughout the project, although it's only been a year, we've in many ways received or kind of been moved by the support that we've gained from not just the food growing community, but the local authorities now, and the council, and potentially, other London boroughs. So, potentially Islington, I mean, I can pitch it as a potential demonstrator or pilot project, but I do so, I guess, because we've already garnered quite significant and, as I say, quite exciting support, not just from that food growing community on the ground, but those up in high offices, in places of power. So yeah, I'll pitch Islington here, and I'm happy to talk more about it, obviously. This being obviously a research project ending this month, but we're going to stay in Islington and see it through, of course.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, it does sound like Islington would definitely be worth talking to. Thanks for that. And we've got some messages coming through. Oh, Mary's saying the densest London borough. Yeah, okay, great. And Jules, who owns the data, how's data presented? How's the data accessed? Thank you for that, Jules. And
sounds like it might be good for Islington and Lambeth to have a conversation about, Islington to share what they're doing, how they're doing it, what's come up with the research.
That's definitely on my mind. Of something that I want to do is to be kind of showing what is possible in other boroughs in London, especially.
Yeah, it'd be great if you'd be up for sharing that project with us, Dan, as a group when we next meet, and showing us what you've done, and
yeah, I'll be delighted to.
Dashboard and
Maddie.
all of that stuff. That would be brilliant. Thank you. Well done.
Brilliant. I'm conscious of the time, and this has been a fantastic meeting. Actually, we seem to have covered so much. Shall we? Are there any, Connor? I think we might have to. I don't want to rush talking about Allot.me, so perhaps we do that next time. Is that okay? He is.
Yeah, whatever works.
We've got
Yeah.
how much time? How long have we got this space? How long can people stay?
I don't want to have people feel that this is too long, this conversation, because it's quite intense. We cover a lot of ground. I'm wondering if we should stay focused on this and try and come out with some actions from what's been suggested so far.
Maybe it'd be good just to see how long people can stay, Janie, and when people have to leave, so we know how much time we've got to.
Okay, who can stay beyond 12:30?
Yeah.
Not Mary, Marge, Sophie, Joe. Okay, and Anne. Yeah, okay, so let's, what depends on baby. What are people wanting now? Shall we try and wrap up this bit and kind of agree on what we're all going to do? So I think there's various different people here who've got ideas of being pilots for the Right to Grow, which I think is fantastic. So I think we're looking at Suffolk, Oxford or Oxfordshire and Islington. Is that right? I mean, there's stuff going on in Leeds, Emily, which I don't know if you want to suggest anything.
And Lambeth.
And Lambeth, yeah.
And Lambeth, yes. So we've got, I mean, sorry, she can't speak. Yes, Leeds as well. Okay. I mean, maybe we can all put forward a paragraph each on why our particular patch is one that would be good. And that would be useful for Pam to know, because then that really shows interest from all these different groups. Because I think between us, we have so much reach. So let's start by that. If I can suggest that you come up with a kind of reason for being a pilot, because we definitely need to test what this Right to Grow looks like. That's one thing. And then there's this, I mean, it seems to me that Land Explorer is the one to use, and there's a question of how that's tested and who our user groups are. So perhaps one of the things in our pitch is what our reach is within our different groups, who our users are, and what the anchor institutions are who are already engaged. So there's that.
Excuse me, Jenny, can I just ask one thing? Land user, who owns the copyright to that? Who owns it if we put this information in?
So Jules is the expert here.
Yes, so Land Explorer was developed by Shared Assets, a think tank whose focus is on common good land use with shared benefits. It was originally project funded to build the minimum viable product, and it's now been spun off into a cooperative. And the cooperative is a partnership between Shared Assets and the Solidarity Economy Association. So as a co-op, it will be owned by its users, which is, again, primarily one of the systemic things that we as a group and society need to change, is who are the gatekeepers for software and who owns the data. I mean, who owns the data is a very good question. The data, if in this instance, because it's public sector, will be open government data, local authority and public sector. Stuff that's created by users, the copyright is theirs. For instance, like if I draw a map and do a site plan, the site plan is mine, it's not public. But those are good questions and a good conversation to have with Colm. But the primary thing is, yeah, it's a co-op. And that's really, you know, and again, I'm obviously very passionate about the fact that it's cooperatively owned and it's a platform co-op. So I hope that answers the question.
And this key thing that OS is, the Ordnance Survey is there to be used within it. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. So
So that's its,
about
is that a sort of USP in a sense?
yes, it's USP in terms of something that's free.
Hmm.
OpenStreetMap's free, Google's free at the point of use. But you know, when you start getting out to the countryside and use Google, all you can see is a road and a couple of houses. You know, that's not great unless you go to a satellite view. OpenStreetMap's generally pretty good, and again, it's collectively built by the community. But yes, if we need, if we need some detail, then Ordnance Survey maps are definitely the way to go. They are normally it's historically been very expensive to access that data, and that was the whole premise of developing Land Explorer, because the Chancellor of the Exchequer announced the opening up of government data, including Ordnance Survey and Land Registry data, and funded that to the tune of 80 million in a budget in probably about 2017, I think, on the basis that by opening up that data, it would increase economic activity in the UK by X billions, about 11 billion. So there is a certain amount of limited access to free data from Ordnance Survey before you reach a threshold where you have to start to pay. But yes, it's free at the point of use for community users, and for the kind of limited use, I would expect it to be a kind of freemium model, but mostly free at the point of use. But yes, the key criteria would be Ordnance Survey map to start with.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Mark.
I think Mary had a hand up.
Oh, Mary. Sorry. Oh,
Mary, you're muted.
Two things. One is that I made a proposal to understand, it'd be good to be clear about what being a pilot would mean. So
yes.
People need to kind of, suggesting people might pitch in for what would it look like to be a pilot, but I'm happy to take an action that would just be writing a sort of one page about what, and I'm not going to be, it's just my idea, it's just a kind of a starter, but what might it mean for a place to be a pilot? Because I think that'll be important to people before they kind of pitch in with their area, what might that look like. And I also don't want us to lose sight, so I know we're kind of taking actions from this meeting and this point, but I don't want us to lose sight of Pam's original ask, which was contacting Lords that we know. While we've gone on this call, I've had a little bit look at the House of Lords timetable. It looks to me like the Lords are unlikely to get to Pam's amendment until, I would guess, around probably the first or second week of March. So we've got a little bit of time, but that's just useful to know, I think.
Yeah, so my action is that I'm getting the list and of people who've already been contacted, and also a paragraph for us to use in any contacts that we make.
Mary, when you say a pilot, you mean for the right to grow? For what?
Yes.
Yeah. And so I'm guessing, Janie, that Pam might already have an idea of what pilot
exactly
means.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so thinking about the local authority is such a critical part, isn't it? Because I think as the legislation is making its journey through, the necessary channels, it's the opportunity to sell, to talk about this idea to local authorities, to help them understand what it is, what it means. If you kind of if you sign up to support the right to grow, what are the obligations and responsibilities around that, and why would I do it? What's the point? Actually, I might just unleash a complete nightmare for myself as a council, and who's completely cash strapped, etc. So how do we articulate it to councils in a way that makes them go, yeah, that sounds like a brilliant idea?
Yeah. And I think they've got that. So I'll make sure I distribute that to everybody.
Okay, fantastic.
Hands up.
Sophie.
Sophie.
I think maybe Jules had their hand up first.
Go, Jules.
Thanks, Sophie. I've talked quite a lot so far, so you go first.
Thank you. I was just wondering, so, you know, I don't have many contacts in the House of Lords myself, but do we have a list of members who would be interested based on, for instance, positions that they've made clear in speeches, even if we don't have contacts for them? Or is it worth actually just trying to narrow it down to who actually would be interested potentially?
I can ask that question. In terms of lists, because there's quite a lot of research needed there as to who are already active in this arena. I think Pam and her team, like Hugh, will know, Hugh Ellis, who's written the detail. I think he'll have a good idea of that. So that's something I'll get back to you on. Jules has just posted 0 hour. What's that, Jules?
0 hour is the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill.
Yeah.
That again is a private members bill supported by Caroline Lucas and Clive Lewis in particular. It's come out of Extinction Rebellion, but it's now a completely separate organisation. And they are a very well established campaign lobbying in the Lords and the House of Commons for this as a private members bill.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be definitely worthwhile having a conversation with them. They will have all of the contacts for Lords and MPs, you know, frequently in contact with the Conservative Environment Network, for instance. And so I think that would be a very fruitful conversation in terms of actually just asking them, can we have your contacts list and put this bill you know, in front of the same people. Obviously, with the right to grow, it's probably slightly less radical than the CE bill, and probably wants to be framed in a more conservative, with a small c kind of proposal, you know, with Town and Country Planning Association and CPRE, etc. But I'd be happy to connect you with the team at 0 hour. As I say, they're very well established in terms of this campaign and campaigning for a private members bill.
Brilliant, Jules. Thank you.
One other thing that I just want to mention as well, just to kind of get on people's radar, so we have a bit more of an holistic viewpoint of, again, mapping and land and perhaps access to land, is I'm doing some consultancy work for the Farming Wildlife Advisory Group in Suffolk, who have 450 farming members in Suffolk, and working on, again, mapping. I mean, mapping and data, it's natural capital accounting and carbon sequestration, you know, in terms of agri-wilding, rewilding, agroecology and what have you, with some quite large scale bioregional clusters. The Deben Valley is a particular example, which has a farming cluster there that farms 62,000 acres between them. And the question that I've been asked by FWAG is what mapping application we should use. And I think the preference, because it's a commercial organisation and farmers are businesses, is to use an application called Land 360, which is paid for, you know, and that's from FERA. And FERA, I forget what the acronym stands for, but they're food and farming scientists, and 25% owned by DEFRA. It used to be a government agency that's been sort of sold off. So it's just, from my perspective, it's interesting because we'll also be looking at funding and stuff, and also the commercial model for farmers, but also in terms of accessing land. Obviously, a lot of farmers have a lot of land. And a good example of that is we've just, as iFarm, we've just planted 1,000 trees as our parish tree planting project for the Queen's Canopy in memoriam, and 4 acres of that land was donated by one of our local farmers. So it's just a bit of information, really, just to let you know that that's a piece of work that's sort of running alongside our discussions as well, in terms of large scale mapping for farms.
Brilliant. I mean, it's interesting in Oxford. So I'm now involved with Good Food Oxfordshire. They're working with landowners and people seeking land to grow food, and seeing what are the barriers there for them to release land for small plots of food growing. So there's so many conversations going on around the country, aren't there? Perfect.
We need to get some funding for you, Janie, to do a farm start feasibility, don't we?
Yeah, exactly. That's what
Yeah.
I'm trying to do. So shall we hear from Connor now? I'd love to for you to just show us what you're doing, Connor. I'm particularly interested that you've got this new piece of work on some is it local authority land? Because anyway, tell everybody. And I'm wondering, do you want to share your screen to show the app? Because Maddie could do that. You still there? We lost him. Oh, he's just gone out for a cup of tea. Come back. And Emily can't speak. I want to. Oh, here he is. Here he is. Okay, great. Do you want to share your screen?
You can. I've enabled it, so
Okay, great.
feel free. Yeah, just introduce yourself, Connor.
All right, I'm just going to come back in. Is that working?
Yes.
There we go. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm just going to load up the app and show, give you an idea of what we're doing. So Allot Me is just, it's basically a platform.
Oh, now you've gone again. We lost you. Can't hear you.
Can see you, but not hear you. Your audio just cut out.
Lost him. What should we do here?
What's the is it allot.me or something? What's the
I think it's allotme.co.uk.
allot.me? Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Oh, Emily's going now. Yeah, so essentially it was, shall I do there it is, allotme.co.uk. It was mostly, he's trying to come in through audio. It was pairing. Are you there now? Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. Can everyone else hear me? Is that okay?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, good stuff. Yeah, sorry, I don't know how much of what I said previously was heard, but essentially Allot Me is a platform that connects unused garden space, or indeed any type of space, with people who want to grow their own food. So we've got a few hundred plots across the UK, and we have some inbound requests from organizations. I'll just give you, if I can share my screen, which I don't think I can. Is that enabled for this?
I thought it was. Technology. Don't you love it?
I mean, do you want me to talk through, Jenny, just while you're figuring it out? It's fine. I can happy to talk through what the.
I think you just tell us about where you've got to. So you've been going for how long? You've got people who are looking for land, you've got people who are offering land. But I was particularly interested in the latest piece of work you're doing, which seemed to be community based.
Yeah, so as opposed to an individual host list, like taking photos and listing their space on our platform, and somebody else getting in touch through AllotMe, we're also looking to create our own garden, so just a more dense version of that, and particularly in very dense urban environments. So the first sort of pilot project that we're doing is with the Bankside Open Spaces Trust. So they manage somewhere between 10 and 15 small parks just south of the Thames, quite central London. The first one we're doing is right across from Borough Station, so it's in Southwark Council, but a very central location. And we're putting, I think, something like 23, 24 raised beds in it, creating a load of plots, and we'll be offering it to our, the people that we have on the waiting list for that area. There'll be a selection of community plots in there, and there'll be, the plots will be affordable to rent anyway. But yeah, that's it. We're also, we've got potentially another couple of projects coming in as well, but I'll not say anything else because they tend to come up and go away as fast as they come up. So
yeah. So this is a business model, but you have got some community. You're offering some spaces for free to local communities, are you? If this takes off, this model.
Yeah, basically, we sort of. This is probably a little bit more unique because we'll just have plots because it's not within a community space necessarily. So it's a garden which is adjoined to a church, and the vicar of the church just wants to see the space used, and they'd be happy to see like a little bit of income coming from it from the people that are renting out the plot. So the business model is essentially that some plots are rented to people that live in the area, and some are offered out for free for community groups to come in and use them. And yeah, we're sort of open to exploring other avenues of how different people within the community can come in and get involved in that. But because this is in collaboration with Bankside Open Spaces Trust, they already have a kind of network of corporates and different people in the area that want to get involved or that want to help out, that'll be used. There's also like a cooperative kitchen nearby that they want to use some of the produce that's grown in the space.
Very good. I mean, my ears pricked up when you said that was church land. I'm interested in that because that's something that I've been kind of looking at and thinking about for a while. Is how we encourage more churches to offer their lands for food growing. So I'd like to know more about that separately. That'd be good. Sure. And yeah, any questions? Yeah.
Do you have, what kind of agreement do you draw up between the landowner and the user? So to sort of support that relationship and support the land to be used well?
Yeah, so it'll be like we're in the process of doing that now, to be honest. It'll probably be bespoke, or we'll draw up certainly a framework because this is a pilot project. We're still working on it. But essentially the key factors are the duration of use of the space. So we need kind of access to that space for like a minimum of sort of 2 to 3 years for it to be even worthwhile setting up the garden in the first place. Then we basically whatever agreement that we draw up between us and the space will be as an addendum to our existing user agreement for anyone that uses AllotMe. So we're already kind of covered for a lot of the fair use policies and misuse and insurance and things like that, and what the space is to be used for. We'll add on more specific terms like that this site can only be accessed sort of an hour before sunrise and an hour after sunset, because it's in quite a central location. Those things will be key. But yeah, and it's a padlocked, gated area, so it's a little bit easier. People will be given keys, and that'll be it. So yeah, I mean we've still to come up with what other obstacles there are to overcome, but we're moving fairly fast on this one because everybody's kind of happy to go ahead. So yeah.
Right. So when it's I'm just looking on the website. So where it's like a back garden in Birmingham, or whatever, or back garden anywhere, then it's just your standard allot me agreement between the householder and the grower. And you'll
Okay,
see-
so you're talking more generally, sorry, as opposed to these gardens,
Yeah.
the community gardens. Well, yeah, we do have quite a lengthy terms of which people are agreeing to when they're signing up to the platform. What is also significant is that anything that's included within the listing. So if you're a host and you're putting up your back garden, anything that you put in the description and is covered is then basically forms part of the agreement that you're entering into. So we just encourage as much transparency. You'll see there that like some of the main questions that they must answer is things like access, when it's accessed, how it's accessed, what amenities are available, is there water, is there storage, that sort of thing. And yeah, and obviously including photographs of the site. So yeah, is there anything else?
No, that's cool. That's good. I mean, quite interested in something called Fairhold. I don't know if you've come across that yet, but it's a tool that's being developed. 1 second. I'm just going to get my headphones. Hold on a second.
Sure.
I think we do need to look at different agreements that are out there already, because I think there are lots of models we could. But I think that is something that will be very helpful. Sorry, go on, Maddie. Fairhold.
Okay. Is that okay?
Yeah, good.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, Fairhold is a sort of a kind of new sort of open it's being developed by the Open Systems Lab to be a sort of agreement that is based on the kind of value, yeah, on a kind of it's a richer agreement that has sort of stipulations around social and ecological gain, value, and that sort of thing. It's really interesting, and it's all open source as well. So I'm quite it's sort of in development, and they're looking at initially at housing and community-led housing and using this Fairhold as a tenancy agreement essentially. But it sort of allows more stuff to be in there, and I'm interested in whether they might be able to sort of come on this journey with us around land and access to land for food growing and the agreements that we put in place for.
I can maybe say a little bit more, Maddie, if it's helpful, just to clarify about how we operate. So this is not necessarily as inspiration for what you're doing, but we don't, like, when somebody rents out a plot through AllotMe, they're not entering a tenancy agreement. They're not a new tenant, or it's not being subletted to them. The host who's listing their space is offering their what are termed host services on our platform. So they're giving access to the use of the space through AllotMe, but they are not a tenant. It's not being sublet. So what that means is that the description, the definition of host services is fairly well thought out from our side. I don't know if that helps at all.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what might be the best tools for local authorities and agreements between growers and local authorities, I suppose. Whether that, yeah, there's obviously different things that would be appropriate, and yeah, just musing over that.
Yeah, it's space appropriate, isn't it? It's all they will vary, each one will vary. So that's helpful to get your input, Connor.
Yeah, I mean, we have an input on every single plot that the individual hosts can actually upload a PDF of additional terms that then also fall under the agreement. But typically people are happy to just list those terms within the list, the plot listing itself. And then when it's rented out, that's an agreement.
I mean, it comes back to this thing of keeping everybody happy, something that Mark talked about from the Lancaster hotspots, the different perspectives, and sort of making it easier for the local authorities, but also making sure that the users feel confident to use the space, because I think quite a lot of people, our experience in Lambeth is people get put off because of the liabilities, or the, you know, that too much is being put on them. Oh, you have to go, Jules. Anyway, I think this has been an amazing discussion, actually, of lots of different things, but that feeds in well to our thoughts on what these agreements look like. So let's look at Fairhold, and Connor, it might be good if you could share anything that you have, and any other kind of lease agreements. Anything to wrap up? Jules is going. Thank you,
Jules.
Thanks for all your amazing
really-
contributions, as ever.
That's okay. Just quickly before I go, again, I just want to really reiterate, and I hope I'm not boring you too much, that this isn't standalone activity. So another piece of work as well that I'm aware of that just it's worth having on the radar is in East Anglia, we've got an organisation called Wild East.
Yeah.
They have an aspiration of rewilding 20% of East Anglia, which is 500,000 hectares, stupidly large amount of land, and they have dreams for biodiversity. Wild East are putting together parish biodiversity plans with Natural England funding from Natural England, and are working with wildlife trusts and the RSPB. When we consider about green spaces and growing food, they're not mutually exclusive.
Definitely.
Because these, you know, our green spaces will also support biodiversity and our birds and what have you. So there's potentially some really interesting joined up conversations, because, you know, they also have a requirement for mapping. So there's lots of different organisations, slightly different things, talking about the same thing. So, but really delightful as ever to see you all. I have to shoot
Very
off
good
and
to see you
go and
too.
do some hiring. So thanks. Okay.
Bye-bye,
cheers.
Jules.
See ya. Bye.
Have a good week.
Any final thoughts from anybody?
I
Sophie,
just have to off as well. Sorry guys, I have to go. Nice to hear from you all.
Yeah, thanks for coming, Connor. It's great.
Thank you, Connor.
Bye, Connor.
See
See you.
Bye-bye.
you.
You're going to go, Marge?
No.
Oh, you want to say something?
My voice has gone completely today. Just to say, I love the idea of Josh's pick and mix. I love the idea that for plots or a lot, that you can choose from a menu of things that you want to happen on your plot. And I think that pick and mix idea to keep it free and open is a really good one. You choose what you want to happen on your plot of land. And I think that could be really useful for local authorities as well, because they really don't want to give up the land. But if there was a pick and mix type of scheme where it could be just a little or a lot, depending on how the council wants to adopt it, I think it could work.
And you mean from things like wildflower meadows to orchards to growing spaces? Yeah.
And then, because he was saying that it's not an agreement, it's not like a tenancy. It's a great way of getting round how the council, because councils never want to give land away, and they always want to know what's going to happen with it. So, that type of, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Sorry, I'm filled with painkillers and God knows what else. But I think there's an idea around that we can adopt.
Yeah.
With councils that makes it easier for them to join in.
Yeah. Oh, Dan.
So, sorry, just to clarify, Marjorie, are you meaning that the landowner has a choice about what happens on their land, or the tenant chooses, the user chooses?
I think the
specified,
use,
or they specify together what it will and won't
Yeah.
be.
I think the landowner says, here's a bit of land, so it could either be somebody with a back garden or it could be a local council, and say, we'll allow X, Y, and Z, you know, from this pick and mix. This is what you can do on this piece of land. And then people just choose to do either that, or then have a conversation and say, well, I'd like to do X and Y as well. I think is keeping it as free as possible. I love the idea of it not being a tenancy, that there's some way around it, that we can all work together, and it doesn't have to be a sort of heavy duty legal signed lease or anything like that. I think the freer and more open it is, the better. And yeah, I don't know how councils would adopt that, but yeah, I quite like the idea of it.
Yeah, I think tenancies, you know, even established growers like are still burdened by these 1 year rolling tenancies.
Yeah.
Which means they don't attract funding, they can't predict what's going to happen next year, they can't put anything in place, and they can't, you know, therefore create a viable business. It's so crippling.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know why councils haven't changed that, or what the solution from a council's perspective would be. I mean, I proposed the idea here in Bristol of the council's working with Bristol Community Land Trust as managers of their sites for food growing. So the Land Trust would be this sort of intermediary trusted partner who could oversee the whole portfolio of whatever they chose to put in that portfolio, land for growing, and not have to, the council not to have to manage it directly themselves. But they've sort of seemed to have behind closed doors rejected that idea, and are putting a bit more resource into their, you know, into their in-house management, which is something. But it'd be good to have made those decisions more in conversation with the food partnership, which they haven't. They've just done it internally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, Dan. Yeah.
You know, just something that Marjorie said, which kind of stimulated a thought. I mean, one of the things at the start of our conversations with Islington Council was that they realised that food growing was just one part of the problem. Actually, there was a wider issue about, well, what happened? How do you get to do food growing? Well, you need to create viable composts, you need to, you know, seedlings need to develop, and some of these spaces, you know, and all the way to kind of food vending, knowledge exchange. So one of the things we did in our project, perhaps one of our USPs in many ways, is develop something where spaces could be, in a sense, a pick and mix, where the local authorities could look at, well, we've got, you know, 10 spaces here. Can we cluster them into a network of spaces, with each one doing a particular function in that kind of local food supply chain? So we haven't got just 10 spaces growing food, but we have, you know, a few spaces developing that compost, a few networked spaces developing the seedlings, cultivation spaces, food vending spaces. And by generating this kind of cluster, you also bring disparate parts of the community together that you wouldn't normally do. And I suppose that there's this other thing about, well, what can a space actually do in relation to its space and its size, its geometry? And one of the things we've got in our model is the kind of pick and mix version of buttons, in a sense, where local authorities can play around. Well, actually, we want to put more importance onto cultivation, so we're going to, you know, filter out the sites which are going to be large enough for that, or we're really focused on food exchange, we need to get more people involved in that, so we're going to weight it towards those social value outcomes. So it's not just about mapping spaces. I think perhaps this is a great foundation, but the conversation perhaps needs to be more than just cultivation, and more than just, well, let's just see how many acres of land we have, to a conversation which goes along the lines of, what can we do best in the spaces that we have? Because sometimes cultivation might not be able to happen, but a space could still be used for a key function in that local food supply chain. Anyway, that was just stimulated by Marjorie's
No, I love that. That's much more holistic, isn't it? And just thinking about the whole borough, and it's a bit like the sort of beeline idea of, you know, having something moving through a space. I really like that. I think that's something we could go back to Lambeth with, Marge and Joe.
Yes, I did want to just add to Dan's point is we joined the Lambeth Food Partnership, which is being run by the public health department of the council itself. So we had some breakout groups, and this happened at the end of last year, I believe. It's a little bit slow going, but one of the ideas was how to create a sustainable food neighborhood. And so it really is a web, as you were saying, a kind of systemic change. It's not just food growing, but there's all these different components, all the way to the sort of ephemeral stuff that you can't, intangible stuff like awareness and skills, upskilling, knowledge, all of that. So so there's definitely that sort of conversation happening within Lambeth itself. So it would be nice to know what the ingredients is for a sustainable neighborhood with composting and all those things. Yeah,
it'd be great to. When would we be able to you be able to share more on your model with us, Dan, and your research?
Well, pretty much as whenever it's convenient. And what we have is at the end of March. I think I said early end of February. But end of March is the project end date officially for funding. But I mean, I'm very happy to share at any point. Midway during March, we're going to have a workshop with Islington Council to show them the dashboard. This is a very user-friendly website that they can use to map various spaces. But I can, it's no secret. I've done various talks in the past about this. So yeah, very happy to share this with the wider community.
Brilliant.
Great. Very good.
And what are the next steps for Islington? Do they just go, yeah, we want to use that, and then, I mean, they're anticipating that they're going to use it already? Is that?
Yeah, so we've been working with them in a sense all the way from the start. I think the next step would be, well, we're going to do some community engagement activities throughout the spring and summer of this year to get local people to share what they feel is important in spaces, so that we marry that up with our technical reports. In other words, we know what's technically possible for these spaces given the size, the soils, the microclimate, etc., the air quality. But it's about weighting those variables with, well, what does the community actually want? And by mapping these two distant data sets together, we can get to an optimized, well, yeah, this space, it's pretty good for cultivation, and it's actually got people behind it who want to do cultivation there. So that's the next bit for us. And Islington, I think, hopefully will go from, oh, this is yeah, quite interesting, to a stage where they actually want to implement this on the ground. So hopefully we start to see these spaces being turned into food growing places in a short time.
Are they Silver Sustainable Food Place? Do you know where they are with that? Are they doing the Sustainable Food Place thing?
Yeah, well, they've recently, funny enough, they've recently won a very, very large amount of money, and also received, I think, a match funding from Savills to give out to local food growing communities, to really do just that, to expand the food growing opportunities there are for local people. So, you know, we're talking hundreds of thousands of pounds, if not more, of funding that the council are sitting on at the moment. And they are, I think, from reading from afar, kind of overwhelmed by the support that they've been given to do this in their borough. So I think hopefully this will kind of spill over to other boroughs, and if we can use that as a way of, you know, generating, you know, contacts with Brent, Lambeth and other boroughs, then I think that would be wonderful.
That's interesting that Savills have come on board, because we were thinking about who the big players are in Lambeth, because Shell's got its headquarters in Lambeth, and we were thinking, ooh, it'd be good to get in with Shell. And also the housing associations are very wealthy, and there's a lot of those in the borough, because the reality is we can't go to local authorities. You have to find other ways of
yeah, that is yes. I mean, to me it's very surprising, because we've got an open door almost every month. We're talking with one of them at least in one of their buildings. So
Amazing.
yeah, it's
Amazing.
quite incredible that
Oh, well, maybe we'll get Savills down in Lambeth as well. That'd be
yeah,
good.
I'm sure. Yeah.
And not BP.
No, not Shell, really. I
Not BP,
agree.
yeah, Shell.
We don't
No.
really want to go into
No.
bed with them.
No.
What's the one thing that I wanted to ask about as well is Lambeth's got this curbside option going. Do you know any more about it? Are they mapping land for curbsides where they're going to green all our curbsides? Have they mapped the land already?
You asking me that?
Yeah. Sorry, Jenny. Yeah.
I actually don't know. I mean, they just launched their curbside
Initiative or whatever it is.
initiative, but that's what they do. They launch these big things, and then there isn't a sense of how that's being backed up.
I know.
It sounds like it might be really great, Dan, if you wanted to do a presentation on what you're doing with Islington. We could invite Oxford, Lambeth, Hull,
Yeah.
Leeds,
Yeah.
perhaps just
I
like a
think
little
brilliant.
cluster of kind of
cluster of
keen-
local authorities, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd be very happy to do that, man.
And is there any connection with Land Explorer in the work that you're doing?
No direct connection, but I must admit, we're at this point where we've done this at borough scale now, and the model that we've got is able to take lots of data, rate it to see what the best function is for each land space. What we've not quite cracked yet is the ability to find sites automated at large scale. So we're working at the very kind of the end product here. And we're relying on existing mapping. So Land Explorer, is one of those, I think key partners that we could potentially do more work with to automate that and upscale to because I mean what we want to do is obviously to do this across the City of London, not just within boroughs, to do this kind of analysis across from a research point of view at least.
May I just add to that? Internally within Arup, we're also doing a lot of. I've been on maternity leave for a very long time, so all those terminologies are right out of my head. But what's it called again? Satellite imagery. So we're doing with now Google Earth, we've got the 3D massing of the city as well. So a lot of it. So we're doing a bit of work with the European Space Agency to look at machine learning and it's actually come a long way, because that was before I went on leave about a year ago. And the potential for that is really interesting, because you can start to pick up like facades that are completely bare, that can be used for urban greening, doesn't necessarily have to be food production, and it also picks up on all the open spaces around buildings. So that's like just another sort of component to overlay into the mapping, and then there's obviously a verification process that needs to happen after that on top of the GIS. So the GIS can eliminate a lot of that stuff, but then the ones that are question marks, then we want to kind of verify, this is a potential site, let's go with it. So there's also that happening internally within Arup.
And that sounds really exciting, because this is, as I say, that the part we haven't, we started with a network of say 30 or so spaces already kind of selected, and we were working out, well, what do we do with these 30 or so spaces? How do we go about making land or local authorities have an easier time of selecting which ones are going to be best, which ones are going to be socially viable, etc. So that the bit we start at that point, we want to start with a blank map in a sense, and get us to that point. So something working, I think now in this kind of phase 2 of our project would be linking up with these platforms that can map these spaces and getting to that detail of between buildings, not just the established allotment sites, but getting to these alleyways that don't do anything that potentially could be useful.
100%.
But also with you know, certainly in Bristol's local plan, there's a, when they talk about food growing and land for food growing, they sort of skirt around the idea of dedicating significant pieces of land, and they look at all, you know, they refer to all that in-betweeny space, the space around flats and all of that. So it's which actually adds up to quite a lot. And also it's right next to, it can be looked after by those who live there, or one or two people can cultivate for that block of flats or whatever. So yeah, there's a lot of that. Yeah, that sort of in between buildings land that we need to
Remember,
find out where it is and
Yeah,
map
definitely.
it.
I
And
mean, Jenny, that's kind of what we did with the Lambeth plots.
Yeah, I mean, Lambeth
groups
has so much land,
Yeah.
right, that's just sort of, you know, dead space.
Yeah.
So,
And the thing to remember also, Dan, is like there's a methodology called vulnerability mapping. That there's a kind of assessment that you do based on, you know, high deprivation areas, access to green open spaces. So that's like another sort of overlay that can really prioritize certain sites to be something that they need to be. Maybe there's more of a social function, maybe there's more of an environmental function. And then there's obviously the greater sort of rewilding of the city, you know, like the sort of natural networks that we really need to enforce to maintain like biodiversity and, you know, surface water and those kind of things.
Absolutely. Now it's a triangulation between environment, social, spatial, all of these together, I think are important.
Yeah.
okay, I think we should
Brilliant.
wrap up. It's fantastic.
That was really good conversation.
Very good. Very juicy.
Lots to think about, lots to do.
Glad to be back.
Yeah, it's good to have you back.
But I'm not going at a snail's pace at this point.
Oh no, not at all. Let's connect in different ways. Make sure that we follow up on the things that have been talked about today. And I will, my big priority is getting something out to everybody about the right to grow stuff.
And what's your instinct, Janie, about when it'd be a good time to regroup and talk and more about, and for Dan to be able to do a presentation and maybe talk more about the mapping component of his work, what that could look like.
I'm thinking different.
Invite some local authorities to come and.
I know. So let's. I mean, once the right to grow is kind of moving, which looks like Mary's saying that it's going to be looked at the middle of March, we'll have some news on that, which will then give the local authorities more impetus, I feel, to say, right, this is something we've got to take seriously. It's a bit chicken and egg, but my gut feeling would be, let's get the right to grow bill moved up the agenda and put our weight behind that. And then, and in the meantime, we can be talking to Islington, to Suffolk, to Hull, and see if there's an appetite for getting together, sharing best practice, like best agreements, how they're mapping the spaces. You know, I mean, there's a huge amount of work to be done on it, but that would be my instinct. So I'm just
in a couple of months, maybe.
I think so. I think April. What does everybody else think? Does that sound good?
That sounds great for me, Maddie, Jenny. Yeah.
Let's try for that.